I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Thursday, robust conversation with friends and colleagues about what's on our respective minds. I'm pleased to have my friend Angela Rose Myers here today. Angela, good to see you again.
Nice to
And
see you.
Ndugu Youssef Mjini. Brother Youssef, how are you, my friend?
Very good, thank you. Hello, Angela.
Hi, Mr. Youssef.
Angela is the political action committee chair for the Minneapolis NAACP. She's a master's student, and she describes herself as a community member and a Black woman in America. Angela, let me start with you and just ask you what's on your mind. What's capturing your energy, your attention, your civic engagement at the moment?
No, there's a lot going on has happened this week. Unfortunately, in Richfield, there was the shooting outside the school of Jamari Rice. And then just yesterday, we found out that there was a Minneapolis SWAT team that came into an apartment building in downtown Minneapolis and unfortunately murdered another Black man in our community. And so, what we're focusing on right now, what I'm focusing on is trying to find out more information and to push for body camera footage of that incident. And as more information comes out, it just is more and more harrowing as to the investigation and as to the action of that. It was not just one apartment that they went into, but multiple. And it is just very harrowing. So that's what's capturing my energy right now in my mind.
I've only followed that kind of without great detail, but I'm curious to get a better picture. And if you have a chance to say more about what you know, for example, what you just said about the arrest effort yesterday that led to the shooting death yesterday. I wasn't aware that there were several apartments that they were entering in. What I did know is that among the residents of that downtown upscale apartment was our state representative who serves my district here, North Minneapolis. I think a story in yesterday's daily newspaper talked about her concern and that of the other neighbors. And this a high-rise unit in downtown Minneapolis. And this is State Representative Esther Agbaje, who's a frequent guest on this program as well. But she made note that she's concerned about this activity and the amount of risk that the entire community experienced. I also note that the mayor made comments yesterday expressing concern that this thing erupted into the violence that it did, concern about the well-being and the mental health implications for other residents in the apartment building, but also the community. I think that's important and good. But in a call yesterday, the question became, the regularity with which this gun violence is taking place in our community. Is this enough? Yesterday we were also focused on the death of a high school student in Richfield, suburban South Minneapolis. 3 people shot, 2 injured, 1 fatally. And the young man that was injured, a 15-year-old Black boy. 2 people have been arrested and are being charged with that. But the idea is that it's a traumatizing experience, not only for those that were immediately involved, but all of the young people that were in this K through 12 school that the shooting took place outside of. And so the question of police violence is a big one. I think the president just finished talking on CNN about expanding violence and how the country should respond to it. I didn't have a chance to watch it all, but maybe someone else has. I see Kamal King has joined us too. Brother Kamal, good to see you. And we're just opening up, starting, and Angela was expressing a couple of things that are on her mind. Youssef, let me go to you because, impressions, feelings, priorities, thoughts.
Well, 3 things, Al. First, good afternoon, Kamal. Good to see you, brother.
Thank you.
And Angela, I've referenced on this program several times in the past your work with the mothers of children who have died at the hands of police. And on your blog, you point out 5 or 6 specific recommendations which they have made and shared with you about how to address this issue. And I hope that at some point during the hour, you'll have the opportunity to share the recommendations that come from those mothers who are more affected than any of us in terms of the impact of these senseless deaths at the hands of police. The other two things that I'm very concerned about, Al, one, are the increase in food prices because of increased energy, increased fertilizer, increased shipping, getting the products to market. I spoke to someone just yesterday who bought a head of lettuce in the grocery store and said it cost $5. And the prices are going up in every aisle on every product. And we know who this hurts the most, the people with the least disposable income who have to scale back on the amount of food that they're able to put on the table for their children. The other interesting cultural piece, and I'd be happy to go into it in more detail, is the fact that Whoopi Goldberg has been suspended for 2 weeks from The View for making anti-Semitic comments. And I note that because when she got to New York, her name was Carolyn Johnson, and she was told that if she wanted to succeed on Broadway, she needed a first name that would really excite people and a surname that sounded Jewish, hence Whoopi Goldberg. And while she has indicated that she doesn't practice any organized religion, she says she identifies herself as being Jewish. But the comment she made on The View was that the Holocaust wasn't really about race. It was about man's inhumanity to man. And the Jewish community was just up in arms almost immediately with predictable veracity. And she had to apologize across all of the late night television shows and backtrack her remarks. But I'm reminded that 90% of the people who practice the Hebrew religion on the planet are what the Jews call Oriental Jews or Jews of color, and that the Ashkenazi are about 10% of the Jewish population, most of the Jewish population in Israel, who are, of course, European Jews. And I thought it was interesting that she considers herself Jewish, adopted a Jewish-sounding name, and has been suspended by the ABC network. And the head of the Anti-Defamation League is calling on ABC News to put a Jewish host on The View so that there can be someone who is knowledgeable about anti-Semitism on the program on a continuous basis. But, just sort of an interesting twist there.
Fascinating. Kamal King, good to see you, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And I'm very interested in this this gun violence that's been plaguing Black communities more so than the nation at large, and Black on Black crime. And I have no answers. I wish I did. I mean, when I think about it, my only answer is that we have to reduce the number of guns. And when I say reduce, I'm kind of saying we need to get rid of that. Not in America, I don't think that's going to happen. So I have no answers with regard to this gun violence and the evident self-hatred that comes along with it. We're killing each other, and teenagers and older people, it's ridiculous. The thing about the increase in prices, my wife has indicated that, check out the stores. Not only are the prices going to increase, it's not going to be much on the shelves. And so like before COVID, well, not before COVID, but in the early stages of COVID, we stocked up on paper goods, toilet paper, paper towels, and things of that nature. So we went back and did that. And as I was in Sam's Club yesterday, I saw for the first time an empty shelf, a couple of empty shelves in Sam's Club, and I hadn't seen that before. So I think that scarcity of goods may be coming around, and the increase in the amount that we pay for them.
Yeah.
So those are the things that kind of like top of my mind now. Oh, and the third thing is this suit against the National Football League
Okay.
by Coach Flores. And in my 1960s and 70s mind, I feel as though, if blacks stop watching it for a while, stop watching football, stop attending pro football games, that those guys, they respond to economics. But then again, I'm not certain that can be pulled off.
Kamal, the Rooney Rule appears to have about as much success as the Leon Sullivan principles did in South Africa back in the 1970s and early 80s. Yeah, not much effect at all. In fact, there were 3 black coaches when the Rooney Rule was introduced, requiring teams to interview at least one coach candidate of color. And today there are a total of 1 African American coaches in the NFL. So your point is well taken.
It reminds me of All Deliberate Speed.
Yeah.
When it comes to integrating schools. These guys, they do respond. They do respond to economics and to cultural shifts. Because if you recall, they were all for Trump when he said, fire their asses, and that kind of put some wind under their sails. But then when the Black Lives Matter, after George Floyd took off, now they have on the back of their helmets, freedom and treat everybody right and all that kind of stuff. So they do respond.
We also remember the fervor about the remarks that the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers made that cost him his ownership of the team, and everybody in the NBA, the owners, the National Basketball Association, and the players were up in arms. The teams were wearing their jerseys backwards and actually boycotted some games and refused to play until some action was taken. The players themselves had a significant role in that incident.
And I'm wondering also, where's Jay-Z and Rock Nation? Because my understanding is they have a multi-year partnership with the NFL, and they created the Inspire Change initiative back in 2019 that was supposed to address, I thought, issues around hiring players, treatment of players, things like that, and also ultimately deciding the Super Bowl. So it seems the Super Bowl deciding the performances at the Super Bowl. So it seems the Super Bowl performances are keep on going, are going on still. But where's Rock Nation and Jay-Z on the Inspire Change part? That part that was a part of, supposedly advertised as part of their partnership. But I guess that's also a critique of Black capitalists, and just generally, you can't just say you're going to do something, and then if there's no change, who is the target as well? And I would say that there is some culpability on the Black folk involved too, because there's a change. But
let me ask AZ, who's our producer here, to check the audio. I got a note from Amadi Ajamu saying he's not getting the audio, and he's monitoring on Facebook. And if you have a way of looking, AZ, to see if the audio is going through, please do so. Now, Youssef, you used the phrase the Rooney Rule. What is that? I'm curious.
The Rooney Rule. Rooney was the then commissioner of the National Football League, and in the 1990s implemented a rule which required any NFL team that had a coaching vacancy to interview at least one, quote, minority candidate as part of the search process, in the hope that this would expose more of the offensive, defensive coordinators, assistant coaches, and former coaches, would give them greater exposure in the hiring process, and would ultimately result in more African-American coaches in particular, given the composition of the players in the NFL. And my point was that Leon Sullivan withdrew the Sullivan principles in South Africa because they were basically meaningless in terms of bringing about change within South African corporations. And hence my comment that the Rooney Rule was about as effective as the Leon Sullivan principles in South Africa. We've actually gone backwards, from 3 to 1 since the Rooney Rule was introduced. But given that we're blessed with Miss Angela Rose Meyer's presence, could we ask her to share with us the recommendations that those mothers, and I forget the name of the group, Angela, pardon me, the mothers who had lost children and loved ones to police involved killings, came up with a series of recommendations which really came from the heart. They didn't come from someone who was pretending to represent those people. Can you share that with us, Angela? What those recommendations were that those moms made?
Yeah, so this was for the 2021 legislative session, and it's family supporting families against police violence. One of the leaders being Tashira Garraway, who's very active in the community. Other folk that who are connected is George Floyd's girlfriend, Courtney. Those like Tiffany, Jamar Clark's sister. There's a number of also activists and folk who help support the group through strategy, connections, networks. So Justin Terrell over at Minnesota Justice Research Center, NAACP Minneapolis, myself, and what can be done in Minneapolis. We help with Nikema Levy Armstrong, Michelle Gross. So a number of community activists are also connected. So their legislative demands last year, and some of these have been, and some only just a few, not all of them have been passed, but just a few have been passed. And so some of them might sound familiar. But the first one being that has not been passed and has not been passed even nationally is ending qualified immunity. And so they put actually these bills forward. So not just legislative demands, but they actually wrote what would be, in the bill, and they tried to find authors to put it forward in the legislative session. So ending qualified immunity being the top one. Police professional liability insurance. So this bill would create a requirement for law enforcement officers to carry professional liability insurance as a condition of employment. And employment agencies must pay the base, but any additional premiums based on officer conduct will be the officer's responsibility. Civilian oversight strengthened. So this bill would repeal MN Stat 62689, Subdivision 17, which prohibits civilian oversight bodies in the state of Minnesota from making findings of fact and complaints against police. And also, they want to see civilian oversight strengthened in general. So most oversight bodies in Minnesota right now cannot repeal or, have any definitive action, legs, real teeth. They can give recommendations. Right. Ending police only response to mental health crisis calls. And so this bill would end police only responses and would, also allow for others like social workers, those who deal with mental health to also respond to crisis calls. Ending the statute of limitations for wrongful deaths. So this is for the deaths, wrongful deaths by the hands of police that have happened over 20 years ago, right? So there have been wrongful deaths that have happened in Minnesota history, and the statute of limitations has a 5-year. There's now a 5-year statute. And so repealing 5 years, just in the case of families, something that happened in 2017, for a family member, it could take them years to just get over that trauma and then just build up the connections needed, the money needed to build a case to bring forward, right? So repealing that statute of limitations.
Question.
Yes.
Does that statute of limitation only apply to police, or is that across the board for wrongful death? Because I think the murder doesn't have a statute of limitation.
So with wrongful deaths, and I'm not sure, that's the question. I'm not completely sure. I'd have to know more. And then it's be for wrongful death civil suits, I would say, for wrongful death civil suits. And then also it would eliminate the statute of limitations for sexual assaults by police. That I do remember being in there, because there is a number of sexual assaults by police that have come forward in the past. So,
Angela?
Mhm.
Also, Colorado was the first state in the country to ban qualified immunity. New Mexico was the second, and New York City was the first city to ban qualified immunity for police officers. And I believe that it was either Louisville or it was Virginia. One of the cities in Virginia were also very close to banning qualified immunity for police officers following the death of Breonna Taylor.
And if you remember, this was something that had federal momentum at the national level when it came to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Ending qualified immunity was a major sticking point as to debate. Right. And a lot of the Black legacy organizations, they said they would not support even the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act if it did not have qualified immunity, because from their perspective, that would have been and is the meat of that bill, and without it, they weren't willing to support. And so there was a lot of back and forth that happened there. Unfortunately, it has not been passed into legislation. My understanding, it did pass the House, but did not pass the Senate. Is that correct, Mr. Youssef?
Yeah, the Republicans held it up.
So they were close, and that was something that Kamala Harris, when she was a senator, she was pushing. She had a number of Zoom talks, across the nation about it. And when she moved to the vice president's position, I don't know who's the senator author, who's pushing it now on that Senate level. And that's also, a sad fate that now my understanding is we don't have a Black woman senator currently. So, it's unfortunate that's had to happen, and she's been, left that spot open, and we haven't been able to recoup that for Black folk as well. But to keep on with the list, just a few more independent investigatory and prosecutory body for officer-involved critical incidents. In prosecution for reporting police misconduct, and access to the body-worn footage within 48 hours. And that bill would allow families or their legal representatives access to body camera footage within 48 hours. Not the public, but the families and their legal representatives. And then ending no-knock warrants. And that bill would prohibit police officers from obtaining no-knock warrants, and except under narrow circumstances, to enter our homes. And so that was one of the questions that I had yesterday when the killing of Amir Locke became public. Was this a no-knock warrant situation? Particularly since at the press conference yesterday, the interim chief, Amelia Huffman, had stated that 9 seconds after entering the apartment, Mr. Locke was killed, shot 3 times. And so, that's after 9 seconds, that's very quick. And so I had wanted to know if this was a no-knock warrant situation, and if the police did announce themselves, what was the time between announcing themselves and entering the apartment and the premises. So, these are questions.
Maybe Kamal can help us, but it was a property warrant executed by the Minneapolis Police Department SWAT team. Kamal, are you familiar with a property warrant?
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I would assume that it's to search the property.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not familiar with this case. Is this something that happened recently in Minnesota?
Yeah, in Minneapolis.
Yes. This happened yesterday in Minneapolis. So the St. Paul Police Department was investigating a homicide, and they had asked the Minneapolis Police Department to execute a search warrant in Minneapolis. And so the Minneapolis SWAT team entered the apartment building and on the says 1100 block of Marquette Avenue, and
At 6 a.m. in the morning.
At 6 a.m. in the morning. And I'm reading this from the Spokesman Recorder. The Spokesman Recorder does have a detailed article out about it.
Excuse me, what was the basis of the warrant? Do you know? I mean, were they looking for? Had he committed a crime? Well, I assume he committed some crime. They thought
the person who was killed was not named in the warrant. Had nothing to do with it.
So they were investigating a homicide, but the person that ended up being shot was not one of the folk who are named on the search warrant. So they were not looking for him in particular, but he was there. And also where he was staying was not his residence, but he was, sleeping on the couch, right? So, I've done this many times, just stayed over at a friend's place or something. So it was also that they didn't know. I would assume that they wouldn't fully know that he lived there, but that's also an issue of how we're executing these search warrants. Maybe that intel would have been important of how many people are in there, how many people do you expect to be at a residence.
You're muted, Al.
You're muted, Al.
Turn your mic on.
Thank you for reminding me. The reports on news TV and in the paper, the daily paper, say that the officers fired because they opened the door or entered with a key, a pass key, and came upon a person who had a gun. And the implication or the feeling you take from the statements made so far is a suggestion that the gun was pointed at the officers and therefore they opened fire. They also said that
although he did have a concealed carry permit.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I didn't see, but that's what the impression that's being left out right now is that this is a person who aimed a gun at officers as they entered, and the news reports say that they say that they loudly and clearly for several occasions announced that they were police and they were there to serve a search warrant, and so that wants to, I believe, leave the public with the idea that everything that was done properly and with due, protocol to inform the persons inside the building the nature of the search warrant by the Minneapolis Police Department. Angela, you talked about there being several units in the building being entered. I wasn't aware of that. So do you have any more information about that at all?
And before you go there, I think that if the people who are concerned, even the families, had the ability to get the police cam, you could put all this to rest.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another reason why they don't want to give up the cams, the camera information until they absolutely have to. But this would put all that to rest, and it goes. And in my mind, it goes to: are you trying to hide? Are you trying to hide? Or are you trying to do justice? So,
and I'll just say this: this is just released from the Minnesota House of Representatives, and it looks like they have many DFLers. Let me see if it's just DFL. It says no. The Minneapolis House delegation is calling for transparency and the release of body camera footage from the shooting of Amir Locke. So the Minnesota House of Representatives are calling for that. They are calling again for the release of the body camera footage for transparency sake. And so, yeah, I think that you're absolutely right, Mr. King, as to if it's the family, that is, of course, who should be prioritized. And in this case, Nikema Levy Armstrong, she's talked, and I've talked to her, and she's talked to the family, and she's dealing with the family members. But my understanding is the body camera footage has not been released as of yet. And usually now BCA and BCA policy, the BCA has taken over the case. And that's the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And they usually take over police misconduct cases of this scale in Minnesota.
It takes them an average of 3 months to provide findings, although police chiefs, local police chiefs have released body camera footage as early as 24 hours after an incident in order to avoid rumors or civil unrest or, misinformation spreading like wildfire in the community. So they have the opportunity to release it should they choose. But in Minneapolis, the longstanding African-American chief of police, who I think was widely respected in the African-American community, stepped down, and we have an interim chief of police who may be vying for the position and wanting to appear to be tough on crime. There are two other things that need to be shared. One, a woman was interviewed on local news yesterday who lived in the apartment next to the one where the young brother was shot. And she indicated that she was frightened for her life and called 911 11 times about activities taking place in the apartment. She moved out of the building prior to this incident. And a representative of the police department said that they've had no fewer than 20 police calls about activities in this apartment during the past year. So we don't know what kind of activity was taking place in there. But again, the brother was asleep on the couch, 6 a.m. when the SWAT team entered, and he did have a concealed carry permit issued by the Minneapolis Police or the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department. So there's a lot of unanswered questions swirling around the community.
On that point, I have to, in Georgia, the governor is pushing a bill for open carry without permits.
Wow.
Open carry without permits. Governor Kemp. And, I've mentioned the book, The Second, several times by Carl Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
And when Black people had permits, like I think it was the guy, what's his name, Philando, he had a permit.
He announced that he had a permit.
Pardon me?
He announced to the officer that he had a permit.
He had a gun and a permit.
Mm-hmm.
But, Black people with guns are viewed differently than white people with guns. So I'm not happy about this bill that the governor is pushing. Just everyone can carry a gun. I mean, like the Wild West. You can just open carry without a permit. If
and open fire.
Yeah, and I feel as I would be more afraid walking around with a gun. For me.
Yusuf, what do you think?
Well, I want to thank Angela for sharing that information with us, because those are valuable recommendations that those women have put forward. And I think they would be valuable in any community or legislative process. I don't know that we've talked about it in the past. There seems to be a sense of, now that we've convicted Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers are on trial for civil rights violations and for aiding and abetting in the murder of George Floyd, that there's a sense that there's nothing more that needs to be done. And I think that's unfortunate. My sense is that one of the easiest and most effective things to do would be to strengthen the background permit process so that people couldn't go to these armory shows and plunk down money and buy guns, and there'd be no tracking system, no knowledge of whose hands the guns wound up in, or whether or not the people who purchased them were literally eligible to purchase a long gun or a handgun. And we've seen evidence that people have been purchasing these guns in border states and then taking them across the border and selling the guns and ammunition to the Mexican cartels. They've been selling them to gangbangers, to people in urban, youth groups. And so then you have the case of this 17-year-old in Illinois whose parents bought him an automatic rifle, and then he took it across the state line into Wisconsin and shot those 3 men at that protest in Kenosha, and was acquitted of all charges. I mean, it's unbelievable that his parents weren't charged for purchasing the gun, that he wasn't charged for illegally possessing it, for carrying it across the state lines, and for shooting unarmed people with it. It's unfathomable that he was allowed to walk in that situation, 17 years old with an automatic weapon, and taking people's lives. We saw a lot of people with assault weapons guarding businesses in South Minneapolis during the civil unrest following the murder of George Floyd. I'm talking about people on rooftops, people in the streets with Desert Eagles, with AR-15s, with shotguns loaded with deer slugs. And even, Angela helped me with this, there was a police dispatch where a group of, I don't know if they were SWAT teams or who they were in the van, said, let's go hunt some protesters. And it was Minneapolis police who were making the statement. Do you recall the incident that I'm referring to?
Yes, not only do I recall the incident, but that incident we NAACP Minneapolis branch, after hearing about it, and other incidents of seeing white supremacists, or I'll just say white folks, since we're on a news, I want to say, I don't know if they are affiliated with white supremacist organizations, but they were white folk who were out looking for trouble, right, during the uprising. To me, that's a white supremacist. And we saw this, so we did tweet about it and try to let our community know, and that really blew up on us in very interesting ways. Was told multiple times not to say that there were white supremacists out there. Told multiple times. We were, we organized to protect North Minneapolis Black businesses, and there was a harrowing night where I was at home, texting volunteers, and I get a text message from the volunteer saying at 3 a.m. about that there was a shooting, that it was white guys in a pickup truck that had shot at them trying to protect the Black business Sammy's Avenue Eatery in North Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And that was something that, was harrowing. It was so scary because, we were out there initially in the beginning, when we saw the arsons that were happening and the protests really blowing up, being like, okay, we need to make sure that, at first we thought it was kids, right, who were looting, right? That's what the narrative was. But in North Minneapolis, we saw actually something very different, where it was kids who were standing up, protecting the businesses. It was Black kids, some Black youth who were standing up and protecting the Black businesses. And it was white guys in pickup trucks who were terrorizing the community.
Yeah, it's if you look at reality, who would be against ending qualified immunity for police?
Police.
The way the way that it's been used against us. Who would be against ending the civilian oversight of police? I think that these people want a police state that they control, that allows, police to do what to Black people what they want to do. And who would be against the cameras, releasing the camera footage? These are people who don't, they want the police protected, the police behavior protected, and they don't want any chains put on police. And I think that if we look at it, if we just look at what's happening and what's happening to us, it's a frightening situation.
Kamal, here's the irony. It was the community, people in the community who had been victimized who called for body-worn cameras, okay, so that there would be more transparency and accountability in terms of police-community interactions. Well, the state NAACP, of which I am a vice president in Minnesota and the Dakotas, worked very hard in the legislature to allow for police officers to be required to make a statement or write their report prior to looking at the footage on the body-worn camera. Because if the incident isn't captured on the camera, where is the leverage to assume that the officer is going to put that in their report or reveal some conduct that might have been questionable during the interview? Okay. And the way that the body-worn policy cameras are written, we've got 800 different law enforcement agencies in Minnesota. Each one has their own body-worn camera policy. So if you're going fishing and you drive 50 miles, you may go through a dozen or more jurisdictions, each of which has its own body-worn camera policies, okay? And there is no requirement on the part of the police to inform people that they're being filmed. And we explained that if a person threatens to file a police brutality complaint and the officer says, let me give you a card with the information on how to do that, and let me inform you that this entire incident has been filmed on my body-worn camera, there's a 95% chance that the person is not going to follow through with a complaint. And in fact, police chiefs have told us that the complaints have dropped off measurably since the wearing of body-worn cameras. Further, if your wife or your partner slips and falls in the tub and breaks their arm, and you call 911 and ask for an ambulance to come and carry your wife or partner or husband to the hospital, do you want a police officer with a body-worn camera coming into your house and filming all the ashtrays to see if there's a doobie in any of them, or looking at what kind of literature you have, or whether there might be stolen property? Why does a person with a firearm on their hip need to be present when a person has had a medical accident? It's not necessary. And the homeowner has the right to tell the law enforcement officer that they would prefer that they not come into their home unless they turn off that body-worn camera. And the police are not required to share that with individuals. And in Hennepin County, in Minneapolis is in Hennepin County. Minneapolis is one of the 45 cities. The police over there use facial recognition software, and they can go to a civil protest and just stand and rotate their body 180 degrees and film everybody in the crowd and identify who has overdue parking tickets, who has outstanding warrants, who is, suspected of criminal activity, and come back and go into the crowd and arrest people. So the policies have been written for the benefit of the police, not for the people in the community who are the ones who have been requesting these in every city in the United States to promote transparency and accountability. So the system, which we hoped would be mutually beneficial for the police and for the community, has now been turned on its head and is lopsided in favor of law enforcement. And the darker you are, the greater the error rate goes up for facial recognition. And people are on Facebook, people are on Twitter, they're on Instagram, all these places. When these kids are applying for jobs, they don't understand that employers are going on all of these social media platforms, entering the names of people who are applying for jobs to see which ones are sitting with a pound of weed in their lap, or drinking underage, or using all of this gangster rap language. And they wonder why they never get called in for an interview when they've got these hellacious video, minstrel performances. Okay. And all employers have to do is type their name and enter it into the search engine, and here's all the evidence on why not to hire this person and give them a job. So
I would say,
go ahead, Angela.
I would say two things. First is qualified immunity doesn't just extend to police officers. It is a lot of elected officials, government officials. So, that also is, I would say, a political barrier to overcome as to why it hasn't passed yet. And then also just a quick response to Mr. Yusuf. I'll say this, like, being a young person, I'm here twerking, and I'm happy about it. Okay, if somebody doesn't want me twerking on the job, then that's on them. But I can still be able to perform with my mind, right? And
That's
so
fair.
my
That's
ability to dance, it really shouldn't impact that. But yeah, I do agree that
I'm
there
just saying
are.
it's out there, Angela, and they're using it. And
Yes,
they're
they
using
are.
it to the detriment of a lot of young people.
And it is Black folk, as always in America and in American history, have always been hyper surveilled for our bodies and for how we act, even if it's not as different as our white peers or non-Black peers, right? I read in the Washington Post recently, there's white kids who are microdosing LSD, and in a New York magazine talked about an ayahuasca trip, and how Wyoming is or is either Washington State or Wyoming has legalized ayahuasca, and these type of psychedelic hallucinogenic drugs. So it's changing times, but it's changing for a white population, where we're talking about decriminalization of weed, and White Bear Lake is the closest town that I live next to now, and in White Bear Lake there's a CBD shop. So it's expanding, and you can make millions, if not billions, off of weed right now. And yet in our community, we're still getting criminalized, thrown in jail, beat up, losing jobs over weed and stuff. So it's really a sad state of affairs as well.
We all grew up with the adage, Kamal, you can't do what white folks do. That's kind of been an understanding that when we watch white people break the law, escape the law, find the loopholes, get treated differently by the law, depending on who they are, what their status is, what their sense of posture is in the community, that they may escape the consequence of bad acting. But we know that Blacks in the same position are, from our point of view, more likely to feel the full weight of the law, the norms of the community. But let me shift, you can respond to that, but shift yourself back to the other comment you made about Whoopi Goldberg. What are your thoughts about that? How do we understand that? And what should the conversation be in the Black community? What I saw is what you described, and that is Whoopi Goldberg making every effort to go and sort of clarify. And I also believed that I heard her differently. I heard the intent of her comments of being one of not minimizing or dismissing the horrific experience of Jewish people. I think that she has always been the kind of person that decried any sort of devaluation of humanity, human life. And in that vein, she spoke about that experience, but she also spoke from her lived experience, our lived experience as people with Black skin in a white constructed world. So what do you think about the meaning of this entire set of conversations, and where do we go with it?
Well, we have to begin out by acknowledging that there is a long-standing debate within all parts of the Jewish community in terms of whether or not they are a nationality, a race, or a religion, or some parts of each. And I should point out that any person whose mother is Jewish is automatically a citizen of Israel. Now, there's three distinctions that I want to make. Okay, number one, people who practice the Hebrew faith. Okay, that's a very large, inclusive group. Number two, citizens of Israel. Okay, and number three, the Zionist government of Israel. And I think that frequently in these discussions that people on the Jewish side of the equation want to put all three of those under the same umbrella. And that's not necessarily the case, because there are many people in Israel who are abhorrently opposed to the treatment of Palestinians in Palestine. Okay. And the fact that when the state of Israel was created, they controlled 18% of the land. Today, they control 82% of the land. And I don't have to point out who has the arable, the clean water, the agricultural, the best land in the country, and who's left, or why, whenever there is a cross-border attack into the West Bank or the Palestinian communities, that the U.S. supplied aircraft bomb the electric plant, the hospitals, and the water plants first, okay, to wreak havoc on all the inhabitants of that community. Now, on the cover of Time magazine several decades ago, Anwar Sadat, who was the president of Egypt, said there will never be peace in the Middle East because when the Jews left, they were black. When they came back, they were white, okay? And the primary occupants of Israel are the European Jews. And there was a group called BASIC, Black Americans Support Israel Committee, headed up by Bayard Rustin and a group of other folks who chartered a plane, flew to Tel Aviv, and were met by Mossad, immediately taken into custody, strip searched, and kept for 72 hours, and then put back on a plane and sent directly back to New York, because Mossad and the Zionist government believed that they were somehow there to create a ruckus and stir up a bunch of fuss, when in fact they called themselves the Black Americans Support Israel Committee. And they got off the plane when they were ejected back to New York and said, well, it must be a terrible misunderstanding, and we look forward to returning.
It was a misunderstanding on their part of who they were.
Thank you.
Who they were trying to support.
Yeah. So, and for a long time, it would be incorrect not to point out that there were a number of people in the Jewish community who were significant allies of the civil rights movement. Okay. But it was this same community that bankrolled Bakke when he filed his lawsuit against the University of Minnesota Medical School because he was not admitted. And there were African-American candidates who were. And many of the attacks on affirmative action, okay, have enjoyed tremendous support from within the Jewish community. And I'm reminded that back in the 50s, there wasn't a street corner in Harlem that didn't have a Jewish person with a clipboard who was getting people to sign a petition in favor of proportional representation for people of the Jewish faith in higher education and medicine and banking and real estate in all of the white collar industries. So they are quick to attack any utterance which they feel is anti-Semitic. And people say it's not so much what's in your heart, it's the effect of your remarks. So there were people in the Jewish community who took that very seriously. But we all know that race is a social construct. There's no such thing as race, okay? Right. And there are greater genetic and DNA differences among us, okay, as African Americans, than there are among people of different races or ethnicities. So, this notion of, is it a religion? Is it a nationality? Is it a race? Is it a political party? In conversations, we need to have a level playing field, okay? Because in these discussions, people want us to just be a minority, okay? Lesser than, subservient. Look up the definition in the dictionary. There's nothing positive about it, subordinate, subjected to the definition, and no self-sufficiency, unsustainable. But other people want to choose multiple definitions and identifications for themselves. And I simply ask, what do you put on the census form when you fill it out? Okay.
What are your thoughts?
60% of our Latino brothers put white on the census form. They're not stupid. Okay. They don't want to go into a data bank as don't give this person a mortgage or, a real estate license or anything else. So it's a discussion that is worth having. It should be a civil discussion, and it should be a brutally honest discussion, okay, on a level playing field, not one where anybody has to subject themselves or genuflect beneath anybody else.
Or feel consequences of being taken out of your job. because you say something that you say with an intention that is proper. Kamal, what do you think?
I agree with you. I agree with you that when I heard her statement, I understood that she was going to catch hell for it, but I also understood that race is a social construct, and she was looking at the Jews as a religion. You know, Jews are a religion; they not necessarily a race.
Well, and she said it's white against white, you know, in Germany.
Yeah, but and like you said, it's the whites are the ones who control Israel, you know, and the Zionists.
Simple fact.
Simple fact. And like Sadat, was it Sadat who said that, you know, they left here
Black,
Semitic and came back white.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cover of Time magazine.
Yeah, and you know, I listened to a lady, I had never heard her. Her name was Shema Mata Ngozi Adichie. Are y'all familiar with her?
I'm not.
This
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, yeah.
Yeah, I heard her. Yes, she's a Nigerian writer, and she said when she came to the United States, they started calling her black, and she said, "I'm Nigerian." You know, I'm not. This is black stuff. She had to live here a few years before she understood she was black.
Yeah.
You know, so it is a social construct, and it in the United States is different than every other country in the world.
Oh, this is the archetypal birth of it. Okay.
Every other country in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they want to get rid of Whoopi, which I thought was one of, you know, I like Whoopi, and I think that she's an honest person. But if that's the kind of stuff that they can use to get rid of a person, then, you know, but then again, we're all under attack. I feel as though we're all under attack.
A person who identifies as Jewish.
Yeah.
That's the irony.
Ralph Bunche said to make his way, the Negro, Angela, that's what they used to call us, must have firm resolve, persistence, tenacity. He must gear himself to hard work all the way. He can never let up. Never let up. And I used to think back, being a kid of the 60s, I used to think that, well, we got voting rights. We have desegregation. So now we can move forward. I used to think that those battles were over. But as Ralph Bunche said, it's never over. It's going to be, because the other side is constantly fighting. I think that they hate us, not so much hate. I think they're afraid of us. And their fear prompts them to constantly try to stay on top. And they see that once they don't want a level playing field. As Jimmy the Greek, there was a guy by the name of Jimmy the Greek who was a commentator in football,
and set gambling odds.
Yeah, and he said at one time, if we let them coach, what are we gonna do? They've already taken over the field, and I think that that's the way a lot of white people feel about white Americans feel about black people.
Let me pivot quickly. Yusuf, you have a comment on the fact that the Minnesota Vikings have chosen Kwesi Mensah to be the new general manager. What does that mean? What does it tell you?
Congratulations.
What are your thoughts?
Congratulations. Let's hope that he's going to build some bridges between the Vikings and the local community. Okay, because we've had a lot of I almost said billionaire athletes come through here and left no legacy, no trace, no connection. And before we end, I want to say that 1619 Project, the book is out. It's 700 pages.
Okay.
And it's incredible. And also there's a website called masterclass.com that has thousands of 12, 15-minute Black History lectures. If you subscribe to Amazon Prime, on Prime Video, there's a 3-season series called Black History, Black Freedom, Black Love. And it's got Nicole Hannah-Jones, the editor of the 1619 Project and an award-winning journalist. It's got Sherilyn from the Legal Defense Fund, Sherilyn Eiffel. It's got John McWhorter.
Gwen Eiffel or Sherilyn? Gwen Eiffel, right? Is it
No,
Gwen Eiffel?
Sherilyn.
Sherilyn, okay.
Gwen was on the NewsHour.
Right.
PBS, her sister.
Okay.
It's got the sister who came up with intersectionality, with Say Her Name, with
Kimberly
critical race theory,
Crenshaw.
Kimberly Crenshaw. It's got what's the brother's name?
What was the name of Black History, Black what?
Black History, Black Freedom, Black Love.
Okay.
And it's on Amazon Prime, and they're like 12, 15-minute lectures. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Jelani Cobb is one of the people. Angela Davis is one of the presenters. Nicole Hannah-Jones, Sherilyn Eiffel, John McWhorter. Just incredible. You know, they have like 3 sets of these lectures on Prime on the website. What did I say? It was masterworks.com. They've got thousands of them. But if you have Prime, check it out. It's free on Amazon Prime all month. And my respect and just sheer adulation of Nicole Hannah-Jones and Sherilyn Eiffel and Kimberly Crenshaw and Jelani Cobb and Angela Davis just went up 10,000% because it's incredible. It's good information. It's short. It's crisp. It's recommended for age 16 and over. So if you've got high schoolers, sit them down in front of the TV and have them check it out too. And you can buy this online. It sells for $38. You can get it for 20 or 21 if you shop. And 700 pages. They've doubled the length of the original essays in the New York Times Sunday magazine. And it's too thoroughly documented to debate. And critical race theory and the 1619 Project have become the favorite targets of the bizarre right. I mean, they're doing everything possible to block even any mention of it anywhere, you know, in the media, in the schools, in colleges, anywhere whatsoever. So you owe it to yourselves to check it out and consider it. But I just thank you for allowing me to do a little
thank you for bringing that.
propaganda.
And it's a good idea to share what you're reading. Angela, anything you're reading right now that you want to tell people about?
Yes, I just finished The New Age of Empire by Kehinde Andrews, discussing the construction of neocolonialism and neo-imperialism in this day and age. The first 4 chapters are about old colonialism, right? And the construction of, if you've read the old book by Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, that was required reading before this book, I think. If you'll see the themes, and Kehinde Andrews is a first Black professor of African studies and African diaspora studies in England, actually. And so his book is a way to bring up Walter Rodney's, book to the present day on, essentially how even China right now is constructing Africa in a certain way, and the utilization of capitalism to construct political contexts for African people. And just to remind folk too that a lot of the technology that we turn to right these days as a way to save us from the climate crisis and the environmental destruction is causing immense environmental destruction in Africa. So even things for our cell phones that we feel is such a progress, the lithium batteries and the materials needed to construct the cell phones and our laptops and things are creating and electric cars are creating environmental destruction and environmental, I would say even a genocide, right, in certain parts of Africa because of the mining, because of the environmental destruction. People cannot do anything except mine. And it is really important that the soil and the water that these people need to survive, unfortunately, has been extremely impacted by and polluted by our consumerism. And it's just a reminder that we cannot consume our way out of a climate crisis, and we cannot consume our way out of environmental destruction. We need to actually focus more on our ancestral practices of giving back rather than to take. So that's a really good book. I really enjoy it, and I 100% recommend it. The New Age of Empire by Kehinde Andrews.
What a great recommendation. Kamal, what are you reading?
I'm reading Raised Fist, Bent Knee by John Feinstein, a book on sports and the politics of sports in America. I was going to run upstairs to get it, but I see we're running out of time.
Yeah. Next time. Well, yeah. I love the sharing. I'm reading 4 books at one time.
Yeah.
Getting to the habit of trying to read a few minutes. But right now in front of me is going back through my collection of James Baldwin's book,
Faith, the evidence of things unseen,
not seen.
Yeah.
And with that, also, I just finished reviewing, going through. This is the cover of it. No Street, No Name in the Street, another Baldwin. I pulled the cover off. But I'm reading the Souls of Black Folks by Du Bois for the narrative project that I'm involved. I mentioned this several times. Narrative.com, narrative with a K, just like knowledge with a K. I'm rocking this sweatshirt right now. If you get a chance to go to narrative.com, and they've created an Africana Studies classroom. It's the largest classroom on Africana Studies in the world. They're saying because so many of us are tuning in and enjoying these rich conversations led by Dr. Karen Hunter, the celebrated journalist, and Dr. Greg Carr. And within that, they've created a new social media experience called Nubia with a K, Knubia. What I've been doing actually is posting these conversations inside Narrative and inside Nubia. So I'm wanting to share this exchange that we're doing. I think it's critical with people around the country and around the world through that format. And so we just finished reading The Miseducation of the Negro by
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson, right?
Yes, sir.
Over 3 weeks, a group discussing that, talking about it, and now going on to W.E.B. Du Bois and planning to do more things around March and April. Anyway, we're out of time. Let's keep reading and talk about reading. You know what I want to do too is ask people to talk to our children about reading newspapers. 2 reasons. One, it's selfish. I own a newspaper and I want to encourage and promote newspaper reading. But one of the things that Carter G. Woodson talked about in his book was the role he played from his dad's instruction. He read the paper to his family, and then he ended up reading it to the people in the coal mines where the family worked. And the idea was that reading is so critical, and reading the Black press was so critical for Black people. And even though we're moving to where we can use other modalities for information digitally, etc., there's no replacement. There shouldn't be replacement for our capacity and our development of training and ability and critical thinking that comes from reading. And we need to encourage our people everywhere to take the time to read the newspaper. And if you can read it physically, great, support the businesses of Black publishing. But if you're reading it on electronically, read, but be more intentional about encouraging and expecting and supporting our children in gaining the world through this act of reading. So that's it for today. Kamal, Youssef, Angela, thank you all. We'll see you next week. I'm Al McFarlane. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be safe, all.
Okay, take care.